All right, I am going to start. And Brandon, if anybody else comes in the lobby, if you'd please let them in, I would appreciate it. All right, so let's get going. I sent out this email about a half an hour or so ago. And as it says, today we'll be going over the chapters 1 to 3 pretest. If for whatever reason anybody watching this, be it live or on tape, doesn't want to do the pretest, that's totally up to you. All right, I'm going to give you an hour about to work on it. And then around 9:15, I'm just going to create it from scratch as though I was a student. Then from about 10:15 to 11, I'm going to go over chapter 4 of the Muroc text. All right. I did attach to the email that I sent out this morning a list of chapter 4 related URLs as well. Tomorrow will be the hands-on test. So I will send the test out sometime around 7 a.m. And then at 8:05 tomorrow for about 10 minutes, I'll go over it. It probably won't even take that long. The test is very similar tomorrow to the pre-test that I'd like you to try to take today. Um, Today's session is being taped, of course, as will tomorrow's session be taped. Now, with all that said, I'm giving you an hour to work on this, so there's going to be a lot of dead air because I'm not going to stop taping. I am going to turn off my share because I'm working on something for my afternoon class. All right. So you'll just basically see this. What's on the screen right now is what you're going to see from from pretty much from 8:15 till 9:15. All right. So tomorrow will be the pretest. Thursday, we'll go over chapters 5 and 6. Friday will be our typical lab period. Now, two things before I quickly go over the pretest with you. First, I have had people email me that they're having some problems with Git and or with GitHub. So one of the things, and I did not put this on my list of URLs, but I will later today, there's a couple. I mean, there's all sorts of really good resources out there for Git and GitHub. Two of the ones that I found are both by Colt Steele. He's a developer and he teaches a lot of online classes. He's got one called Learn Git in 15 minutes and another one that's called Learn GitHub in 20 minutes. I think they're both really well done. They're both around 3 years old, so you could say, well, are they old? Not really, because not much has changed. All right, so I will make sure to get you the URLs for those. For the people who have been having problems, like with me, if I go out to github.com and if I go out, let's just say that I'm going to make a new repository here. All right. Well, under the owner here, you may not have that, but if I go here and I just put in here some junk, all right, and I click that, yours again will be private. All right. But when you click creating repository, please make sure that you copy this line right here. All right. Please make sure you copy that line because that's the line that's basically going to link up together Git and GitHub. And that's the one that you're going to have to put into the system later. We'll talk about that in a little bit. All right. The last thing I want to mention before I quickly go over the test is I had somebody email me this morning saying that when they were trying to do some of the downloads for the class, that they were getting a message that Smart App did not want to let the downloads go through. And as it says, basically what Smart App is, it says it can be used with Windows 11 installs only. I have Windows 10 on my machine, so I had to even look up what it is today. But what it is it's a security tool that anytime the tool, the software itself thinks something is suspicious, it will basically tell you, hey, I don't think you should download this. I would never, ever give you something that I thought was even remotely bad. Everything that I'm asking you to download, I have downloaded as well. All right. I just wanted you to know that. So very quickly, let's go over this test. All right. Create a new folder in your regular GitHub repository. Call it pretests. As it says, place all of the web pages in this folder. In fact, under the folder pretests, I'm going to make another folder that I'm going to call pretest 1. And as it says, do not delete this folder or its contents because we may use it later. So to start with, in the new folder, create a 3-page website. So you can create a single page, index.html, and then copy it over to about.html and to contact.html. Again, you can watch me do this a little bit later. Use relative hyperlinks because the 3 pages should be connected, and put the hyperlinks down at the bottom of the page just for something different. I believe you're asked to do that tomorrow on the test. So, at least you'll be able to see how to do that. On the index page, use an H1 heading so that it says home or home page or something like that. And then just 2 paragraphs. You can put anything you want in there. If you say, I don't even want to put down my favorite TV show or hobby, you can go out to lipsum.org, lipsum.org. Just put in a couple of garbage paragraphs. That's fine too. Same thing with with number 4, but number 5, have an about page and use an unordered list. So that's a UL with 5 favorite foods. If you don't want to put foods in there, just put anything you want in there. It's not that big a thing. Then on the contact page, and the contact page will change a lot later in the semester, but we haven't talked about forms yet. So all I want is an H1 tag that says contact me, and an address tag with the information that you're asked to put in there. I don't care if you use bogus information or actual information. That's up to you. All right. You're not turning this in anyway. Then for step 7, make a new folder underneath your project that's called CSS. In that new folder, create an external style sheet named styles.css. Make sure you link to that on each page. Create your own nice looking background color and font color. They should go with one another. All right. I mean, it should be colors that are easy, so not that hard on the eyes, etc. Choose 3 serif. It should have said choose 3 serif fonts, but that's okay. And place them in the body selector of the styles.css using the font family attribute. If you say, I don't know how to do that, I'll do it for you so you can see exactly what that's like. Change the size on the about.html H1 tag only, so just this HTML tag, using internal CSS. I'll show you how to do that. All right. Use inline CSS to change the color of the H1 headings on each page. That's not the best way to do it, but we'll do it anyway, just so you see it. Evenly distribute the white space on the left and right. That's using the margin property. If you say we didn't do that yet, I'll show that to you. Add an HTML comment on the top of each page, explaining what the page is about. Add a CSS comment to the styles.css page, explaining what that page is about. Validate all 3 of your HTML pages. Validate your CSS page. All right, again, as it says, do not delete this. It may be used again. So it's 8:15. All right, at 9:15, so 1 hour from now, I'm going to do this for you as a class. I guess I'll leave this up here. All right, I will be online for the entire time, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my share right now, and I'm going to change it so that what I'm sharing with you is just going to be a window. So in other words, it will be the test. So is what you're seeing right now on the screen the test?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so like I said, you've got an hour to work on this, and at 9:15, I'll break in, and so there's just going to be basically dead air for about an hour. All right, I'll talk to you then. All right, you can consider this the 5-minute warning. In 5 minutes, I'm going to recreate the chapters 1 through 3 pretest for you. So if you need to take a break or whatever, like I said, I'll start up right at 9:15. All right, I'm going to start back up. And as I do here, okay, let's see, it says there's somebody in the lobby. All right, so I'm going to start up. I gave you, like I said, from about 8:15 till 9:15 to write this. So I'm going to bop back and forth between the actual test and then following the steps in here. So taking a look here. Oops. All right, so create a new folder in your Git repo named Pretest. Shouldn't be very hard to do. I'm going to put everything in this thing that I've got called AWD1000 Spring 2023. So I'm going to come in here. In fact, I'm going to create two folders right away. I'm going to create one that's called HOTS, because that'll be for the hands-on tests. And then I'm going to create another one that's called Pretests. All right. And then in the pretest folder, I'm going to create another folder that I'm going to call Pretest 1. All right. And I'm going to open up that folder using Visual Studio Code. And there's nothing in that folder right now because as you saw, I just created it. So what do we want to do here? So we've done this. All right, we want to create a 3-page website with index.html, about.html, and contact.html. So let's start by bringing this up. And inside of here, I'm going to click here, and I'm going to first create index.html. All right, and you saw this little Emmet trick I showed you the other day. So I'm going to go here, put in the exclamation point, hit tab. All right, so now I've got that one done. All right, I mean, there's more that's got to be added to it, but I have an index file. And I'm just going to go and copy this and then paste it. I could just have as easily have created the new one myself, then rename it, and this one will be about.html. All right, and then the last one will be contact.html. Whoops, boy, Jeff. Contact.html. So I now have all three of my pages in here. All right. So create a new folder. We've done that. Create a 3-page website with the following pages. We've done that. So I'm up to here. Now use relative links to connect all pages. Might have been faster to just put that stuff in first, but this way you get to see everything that I'm going to be doing in here. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm in here and I'm on the contact page. Doesn't matter which one you start with, but I'm going to put contact in there for a title. Then under my body section, I'm going to add a nav. And in that nav, I do want that at the bottom. I'm not going to worry about placement of that right now. That's totally okay. I'm going to put in an unordered list. And in an unordered list, remember what goes in there are list items. And this will be a href equal, and this one will say index.html, and I can put whatever I want in there for text. So I'm going to put home because that's a thing people typically put in there. All right. So then next I'll have here about.html, and that will be about. And then finally contact.html and contact. Now I want to copy this over to the other two pages, but before I do that, I'm going to do a file, save all, and I'm going to right mouse click on here and bring this thing up in live server because I might as well make sure it works before I go out and do anything else with it. So there it is. So there's, okay, it says I'm on index, so that looks like it worked. It says I'm on about, and it says I'm in contact. So all three of those appear to work. Again, I'm going to put some code in here, but I know now that I can go and copy this over to the other two pages. So I'm just going to grab that, and I will put that in here. And I will also put that in here. The other thing, and I don't remember if you're asked to do this on the test or not, but you really always should change your title. So I will call this just either index or home. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to call this one about. And remember what that does, since it's in the head section, is where it's going to show all of that is going to be when I run the program, it shows it up here. So notice that says about, etc. Okay, all right. So what have I done so far? I've used the relative hyperlinks. Yeah, they should be found at the bottom of each page. That's fine. That's not going to be hard to do. So I've completed steps 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to take for granted that if I do anything in here that doesn't make sense, that you're going to ask. Please feel free to stop me at any time. For those of you who are watching this on tape, if something doesn't make sense, email me. All right, and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. I should tell you that, again, tomorrow you'll be taking the test. And I will go over, the test should be emailed to you sometime around 7 a.m. tomorrow. All right. It's due by midnight tomorrow night. Okay. And I will be online virtually all day. Now, I do have an afternoon class from basically from 12 to 4. So during that time, if I do get an email from one of you, I'll try to answer it when the class goes on a break. All right. But I'm usually up until about 9 o'clock, but I'll stay up till at least 10 tomorrow because I like to do that on days when there's tests in case people have questions. All right. So on the index page here, we want an H1, okay, and 2 paragraphs about your favorite TV show or hobby. All right. So let's go over to index here and let's start by putting in that H1. All right. And we'll just say homepage. Again, what you put in there is not that important. And a little shortcut in here, just so you see this. All right, I'm going to put in a paragraph tag here. And if I want to put in some of that lorem ipsum text, I can just literally come in here and type in lorem 50 and hit enter. And actually it put in a paragraph for me. It's got basically just a bunch of garbage text in it, but it's totally fine. And I'm going to do a view and word wrap again so it all shows. So you can see it's there. And I could either copy it down or I can create another one. It doesn't really matter. So I'll do another lorem. Let's put a 40 in there this time. So I've got 2 paragraphs now. If I save this, and again, this is referred to as just filler text. All right, so you can see what's in there. And you can see since I put this stuff above, it's already pushed this down to the bottom of the page. And that's what I wanted. All right, okay. So just again, following the steps here, I now have step 4 done. So I'm going to go to the about page. All right. And we should have about in there and an unordered list with bullet items with 5 of your favorite foods. All right. So let's go to about. We'll again make sure we move it up to here. So another H1. And this will be about. And we want an unordered list in there. And it's unordered because, your favorite foods don't really probably have an ordering to them. So in fact, I'm going to do one last thing. You don't have to do this. You weren't asked to, but I'll put a paragraph in here that just says some of my favorite foods. Okay. And then I'll just list 5 in here. All right. Let's see. Lasagna. And I'm going to just copy that down. And we'll just come up with 5 different things. Chicken. Chocolate cake. Ice cream. And pizza. All right, so again, if I come in here and do a file, save all, and I open it with live server, there's my about page. All right, I can go back to my home page. So there's stuff on the home page now. There's stuff in the about page now. All right, so let's see what we've got left to do here. So I've done step 5. All right, now on the contact page, use an H1 that says contact me. then an address tag with first name, last name, line break, address, cities, etc., etc. Feel free. What I'm going to do for right now is I'm going to just grab this whole thing. I'll remove it, but I'm going to put it in that page just temporarily. So in here, I'm going to come in and I'm going to put in an H1, and it's going to say contact page or contact me, whatever the heck it was supposed to say. All right. And I will put all that stuff in here, but I'll just put it in an HTML comment. Okay, just so I don't forget anything. Use an H1 heading, so, and have it say contact me. So I've got all that. Then an address tag. All right, so I'm going to put that in right here. Address with your first name, last name, line break, address. I'll just put in Rankins. Line break. So let's see. First name, last line break, address, line break, city, state, zip, line break. So let's do that one now. Whoops. So city, state, zip. Uh, 63385. Phone number, email address, and phone number. Okay. All right. So email address, jpscott@rankin.edu, and phone number 314-286-3675, which is my Rankin email. Now, you may or may not be aware of this. In fact, let me get rid of all this stuff that's left. So feel free to use bogus, bold your name. Okay. Italicize all other information. So with this, I'm going to put in strong tags here and here. And to italicize everything else, I'll put in an M tag here, and I'll end the M tag right here. Now, if I run this right now, this is all going to be on one line, even though I manually hit the enter key. So if I want line breaks in there, I have to put them in myself. So I'm just going to put this in and copy it. Oops. There we go. So file, save all, and let's come in again and open it with live server. So you can see the contact me, that is bolded. Looks like it's italicized too, but I can change that. And that is all italicized. I can now go to any of my pages. All right, so they all have stuff in them. All right, so strong stuff. No, it doesn't look like it. I guess the M is right there. Yep. Okay, so keep looking here. All right, so I've got the first 6 out of my 15 here done. Now, no one has asked a question, so I'm taking for granted that everything I'm doing here makes sense.
I have
All
a
right,
question.
go ahead.
Uh, so whenever I pull up my like home page, right? And it'll let me go to all the other pages, but whenever I try to go back to the home page from like say the about page, it just gives me that cannot get slash about
Okay,
percent 20
then I'll
points.
tell you what it probably is. All right, not seeing your screen, I don't know, but probably what it is remember when you do this, this has to say index on all of them. If you have it say home, so in other words, what you put here has to be the exact name of the page. So if your page is index.html, there's no reason it shouldn't work on all of them. But if you put home there, or if you call this home.html, you'd have to change it accordingly. All right. Now, again, if you say that's not have to see, then I have to see what it is you're working on. But you also have to make sure you put the double quotes in there and that you set it up the way that I've set it up. Now, if you say I've done all that stuff, then when we get done today, just email me what you have. I'll be happy to take a look at it and get back to you.
Awesome.
Okay?
All right, thank you.
All right, sure. All right, so let's continue on here. Next, we are supposed to add a new folder named CSS with an external style sheet named styles.css, and then we're supposed to link that to all the pages. All right. So we're going to come into here. I'm going to click in the empty area down here. I don't want to add a new file. I want to add a new folder. Call that CSS. And in that new folder, I want a file that's called styles.css. You want to make sure that that file is inside of that folder. You can see when I open it, when I close it, what happens. All right. Now, just to test it to make sure it works, I'm going to put it here. I'm going to change this in a minute, but I'm going to put it here, body, and I'm going to put background color red. Okay. And I'm going to say file, save all. Now I've got to go back into each page, and in my head section, I've got to link that. So I can type in link, hit tab, and in here I'll put in CSS / and notice it finds it, styles.css. All right. Now I've only got it right now on my home page. And so you'll notice that if I open it with live server, that's now red. The other two are not. All right. So I want to fix those real quick. So I'm just going to grab that line of text, line 8 here, the link line, copy it to the clipboard, and I'm going to put it, again, make sure you put it in your head section someplace, and also in the contact page. All right, so let me do a file, save all, and let me run it again. I should now be red on all pages. So there's home, there's about, and there's contact. So it appears as though I've linked everything up correctly. All right. So create a nice looking new background color and a font color in styles.css. Well, I don't like that red, so that's not nice looking. And you may or may not be aware of this. We'll talk about this in a later chapter, but red is actually the hardest color there is on the central nervous system. And so for instance, if I was doing a website that was going to be used possibly by people who are schizophrenic, I wouldn't want to make it red. All right. So let's see. Let me go back to here and go back to our styles.css file. And we'll just use something pretty simple. All right. Again, we're going to be talking tomorrow about colors. So, and maybe even today, I don't remember, but I'm going to put in here almond. No, I thought there was an almond. Antique white, that looks like it'll work. All right, so that'll be my background color. And for my text color, I don't know. I just saw aqua in there, so let's see. Let's go through this a little bit and see if I can find something else that's a little darker. I don't want black, but let's use this brown that's right here. Again, this probably won't look that terrific. All right, but it should look okay, and it'll look better than if it was red. Okay, one thing, just so you know this, you cannot run live server from inside of a CSS file. Notice it's not even there. You've got to go back to one of your HTML files and then run live server from there. So now you can see it. Now you can see I've got, and that's not too bad. So there's the home page, there's the about page, and there's the contact page. All right. Like I said, it's coming together. It's not fantastic. Doesn't look terrible either. So, oops, I don't want that. Sorry. All right. Now, the next thing says choose 3 serif fonts, place them in the body selector of the CSS file and using the font family attribute. Before we do that, let's go look online. I'm going to close a bunch of these. And I'm going to say serif versus sans serif fonts. All right. And they'll be, I mean, again, some of these will be really good. Some of these won't be that good as far as the definition. Okay. Now let's see. I'll go to Microsoft. Tell you what, there we'll do that. What's the difference? And they'll go through here, and I was hoping they don't have it though. Well, let me go back. If you look here, okay, notice serif got the little tail on the bottom of the A, where sans serif doesn't. All right. So there's, like I said, all sorts of different sites out here, but I want to make sure that I'm choosing serif fonts. Well, it's the same one. So let's see. I'll say here, what were we asked to do? We were asked to put in 3 serif fonts. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say serif font examples. Okay. So serif fonts, myfonts.com, that probably would show some. So let's see. I don't know what that is, but okay, examples are old style serif fonts, transitional serif fonts, such as Times New Roman, or slab serif fonts, such as Rockwell. So I could just grab any of those. All right, so let's grab, I'm going to grab, it's got Garamond. I think you're asked on the test not to use Times New Roman. So let me put these in here. I want to come back here and I want to go to my styles. All right. So I can come in here and do it right here and type in font family. All right. Oops. And let me come in here and I'm going to grab what I just put there and throw it into a comment, just so I've got all this stuff in here. All right. So I'm going to grab 3 of these. So Garamond, and I'm going to explain exactly what this is in just a second. So Garamond is 1. Again, I think you're asked not to use Times New Roman. So I'm going to put in here Bodani. Bodani and Rockwell. All right. Now that I've got these, let me explain what these are. All right, because it may or may not make sense to you. And if it does not, that's not a problem. But let me get rid of this. All right. Oops. When you work with a font family, that was great. Okay, so Badani, I put it in the wrong line. And Rockwell. All right. So when you come in here and you work with font families, what you're telling the system is, what I want you to use is I want you to use the Garamond font. If for some reason that font isn't loaded on this machine, I want you to use the Bodani font rather. If the Bodani is not on the machine, I want you to use Rockwell. Now, one of those should be on there, but typically you put a default at the end. So I could just put in here serif, which means, again, every computer has a serif font and a sans serif font. All right. Now this should look different when we get done. I want to mention one more thing to you, that if let's you were asked not to put in Times New Roman here, but let's suppose that you were allowed to put it in. So I typed in here Times New Roman. That's going to result in an error. If you've got blank spaces in there like this, then you have to take it and put it either within double quotes or single quotes. If you've got something with multiple words in it, we don't have that, so we don't need to worry about it. All right. So I'm going to do a file, save all, and I'm going to go back again and take a look at my site. All right. It may or may not look different to you. It does to me. All right. I can see the serif with the little tails on, like the M, etc. All right. And so you start to see how you can really change the look and feel of a site by using different fonts. Now, one thing, not today, but one thing fairly soon we're going to get into in here, just so you see it, is I can go out to fonts.google.com, and Google has their own fonts. And the last time I looked, now it's up to 1,482. And we'll learn how to go and add these fonts. There's more than one way of doing it. But I mean, you could spend the whole day just looking for the font you wanted. All right. Plus, it's possible to add more than one font if you want to do that. So for instance, maybe you would want your paragraphs to use one font and your headings to use another font, etc. We're going to be getting into all of that stuff. All right. Okay. So we've now done this. We chose the three fonts. We put them in the font family attribute. Change the size of the on. Oh, that didn't read very well. Let's change the size of the about HTML H1 tag using internal CSS. We talked about this the other day, that there's basically three types of CSS. I call them external, internal, and inline. Our textbook, what I call internal, our textbook calls embedded. All right. So how do we do that? So again, we're up to number 10 here. And I'm going to come in here, and this is the about.html. We only want to change that tag. All right, and I'm going to make it a lot bigger just so it stands out. To use embedded or internal, you put a style tag in here. All right, and I'm going to say for each one tag, H1 tag that's in here, and there's only one, I'm going to say font size 3 rem. It's going to get a lot bigger. And don't worry about what rem means. We're going to start talking about that actually today. All right, so file, save all. Let me go back to my index page here and bring that up with live server so you can see the size here. But the one I just changed was this one in about, and you can hopefully see it's a lot bigger than the other ones are. All right. And again, to do that, I used embedded or internal CSS. And when you do that, you are adding in here, all right, you are adding in your, and it was in the about, in here, style tags. It's only going to apply on that particular page. That's what we wanted in this example. All right, so let's see what else we have in here. Next, we're supposed to use inline to change the color of the H1 headings on each page. And again, it is recommended that you never, ever, ever use inline CSS because it has to do with what's referred to as a separation of concerns. And what that means is your HTML file should hold only HTML. Your CSS file should hold only CSS, and eventually your JavaScript files should hold only JavaScript. Well, what we're doing is we are literally putting CSS right inside of our HTML elements, and that's recommended that you never do that. So you might say, well, then why are you doing it? Well, I'm just doing it because that's one of the things you're asked to do on the test. Okay, even though it's not good practice, plenty of people still do it anyway. It's kind of like, you know, when I go to my daughter's house, I have to go on 64 West and then come back on 64 East. I try to keep it around 65. I stay in the right lane all the time because even though it says 60, you know, and I go 65, you know, that's, I guess over time that's become a recommendation, not a actual speed limit. All right, so let's use the inline CSS to change the color of each H1 heading. Now, I know how to do it, but I'm probably going to screw up the syntax, so I'm going to put this in. Inline CSS example. All right, and there's inline CSS, there's a W3 school, so I'm going to just grab their example. And look, wow, that's pretty nice. That's almost exactly what I want here. Style equal color crimson. I'll just grab that for now. I don't want to change the font family, all right, because we're not asked to do that. And here they'll tell you again why you shouldn't actually be doing this. So let me come in here and do this. So I'm going to come in here and write in the H1 tag itself. What did I copy over? The whole thing. All right. So right in the H1 tag itself, I'm going to replace this. All right. And style color And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in here a color that's different than this one. So I'm just going to stick green in here. All right. I like to always do this first. I could just go and copy it over. I could do that. And I'm in the About page. But what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to open it with Live Server and make sure that that's green. Well, something screwed up. You can see that. So I didn't do it correctly. So let's go back and look. So H1 style equals color green. All right. So something in here it doesn't like, and that's fine. Probably the fact that I now have an extra H1 tag in there and it was confused. So let me do another file, save all. Let me go back, and there it is. It's in green now. So now that I know it works, I can grab that line, copy it to the clipboard, and put it in here. But I'll have to change this to home page. All right. In fact, I'm going to change this one from about to about page. And the contact. I know it said contact me, but I'm just going to change it to contact page. All right, so let's make sure they all work now. I've got that comment in there. That's code I don't need. All right, so let's do a file, save all, and let's take a look. Again, I should now have a green heading on each page. There's the contact page. There's the home page. There's the about page. And my about page is, the size is different on that one. All right, so what else is left here? Evenly distribute the white space on the left and right-hand sides of each page using a wrapper div and the margin property. And that probably makes little to no sense to you. So the first thing that I'm going to do in here, the first part of this is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create a div for each one of these pages. Everything that I put in here other than the heading, in fact, I'll even put the heading in there. I'm going to put all this into a div. And if you say, well, what is that? You'll see it in a moment. So there's that. And I don't want this thing, the thing on the bottom, my nav bar, I don't want that to be inside of I don't want that to be inside of my div. Some of this stuff, if you say, well, why is that? You just learn it over time. That's the best thing I can tell you. All right. So there's that one. So I now have a div here and I'm going to give it an ID and I'm going to set it equal to the word wrapper. All right. So let me copy that and I'm going to put it on the other two pages. So there's my div, ID equal wrapper, and I want to end the div. Okay, so that's done now. Well, somehow that div, there's the beginning, and I've got another div here. I don't know how I got divs there, but I don't need this div here. Okay. I can do that if I want to, but I really don't need to. Okay. And again, there's an ending div. Oh, that's the one I did already. So it's contact and about are done. And here's the one for the home page. So div ID equal wrapper. All right, let me get the rest, move the end of that div over. I'm going to first quickly move all of this stuff over. That. And then put in my ending div tag. There we go. Now, right now, it's not going to do a flaming thing. Nothing, because I haven't put any CSS in there for that. So let's see if we put the CSS in, what happens. Okay. So we've got a div. Divs start with a pound sign. We called it wrapper, so that's its name. And we're going to put in there margin, auto, 0. We're going to be explaining all this stuff. All right. This 0 that's right here means the left and right margin, and this will be the top and bottom. Let's see if it centers it. How's that? And I might have to play around with it a little, but I don't think I will. Let's see. All right. Now, it may not look any different to you, and it doesn't to me, so maybe I did not do it right. All right. This is looking exactly the same to me. So let's see. Let's go back. All right. Now I notice there's an ending div there. I don't know what that's for. So there's my beginning div. I want to just look at it, make sure that it looks correct. To me, it does. Div ID equal wrapper. So that one looks okay on the home page. All right. Then we've got our about. And again, we've got a div that ends down here. I don't know what that's doing because there's the beginning div. The ending div should be right here. Okay. And then finally on my contact page, that one actually looks correct. So let me do a file, save, bring that up, open it with live server. And I know what the problem is. Okay, because I specified this, I believe, backwards. We'll fix it. All right, where I've got here auto 0, it should be margin. Try it again. It should be margin 0 auto. What that means is I want there to be no margin on the top and the bottom, and I want you to center it on the left and the right. Let's see if that worked. Okay, I'll go back to the index page. Try to go back to the, come on, there we go. And it still doesn't look like it's centered. Well, I'll tell you what, let's just grab one thing in here because that is the right way to do it. So let's see, ID wrapper. Let's end the div right here and see if we do this, just that. All right, if I can center the heading on the home page, I'm going to remove this. All right, so file, save. I don't think I'm telling this to you incorrectly, but if I am, we'll check it out in a minute. Still not. Okay. All right, how to center using margin auto. All right, they're just putting the word auto in there and nothing else. So let's look. Oops. All right. Still isn't centering it though. Okay. I will look at that during the break because I've done that before and I've gotten it to work without any problems, but it's no biggie. We're going to get it to work. Before the period's over, I'll have given you the correct code. All right. Add HTML comments at the top of each page and then a CSS comment on the CSS file. So let's come in here and do them in order. We don't have to, but I might as well. So in my body, I'll just put it in here. And I'll just say, this is the home page for my website. Okay. When you're asked to do something like that, in all seriousness, all I'm looking for is, did you put a comment in there? Not so much what did it say, because I don't really care. All right, so this is the about page. I mean, I'll assume that it's the content is correct, whatever you put in there. And this one will say, this is the contact page. In other words, I wouldn't want you on all these pages. I wouldn't want you to say this is the contact page on all 3 pages because that wouldn't technically be correct. All right, remember, that's how you begin an HTML comment. That's how you end an HTML comment. And then finally in here, you do these differently. You start it with a slash star. You'll notice everything turns green. And I'll come down here and I'll put in a star slash to end it. All right. And I'll just say, this is the associated CSS file. All right. So I'll do a file, save all. Like I said, something is still a little hosed. We'll have to fix that. But let's take a look at what we have right now. All right. And what I mean is I'm going to come out to the jigsaw first. All right. So CSS validator. There it is. Okay. Remember, there's different ways of doing this. I showed you this before. Let's do it by file upload. All right. And I will choose my file. So from my home page and in my pretest, CSS, there's the styles.css file. I'll click check. And it comes up with a little flag. It says, congratulations, no errors found. So that one's done. And let's go do the other ones. So let's say here, HTML validator. All right, we'll bring up the HTML validator markup, same way. All right, file upload, choose file. And we'll start with index. There could be errors in here too. If there are, I'll have to fix them. All right. So trailing slash has no effect and interacts badly with unquoted values from line 4. So these meta tags, the system actually put these slashes in here. I didn't do that. But you'll notice everything that's in there is green, meaning there were no errors. Okay. The problem is I've got an autosave set up on my system, and that's putting these slashes in here. So it's totally fine the way it is what I'm telling you. All right, let's go back and try the next one. And we will try the about page. Same error messages. Here it says stray end tag nav. All right, from line 33. That is an error, so that will have to be fixed. So let's take a look at that. So that's in the about page. And there's my ending nav. Somehow I removed my beginning nav. Don't know how, but I did. All right, so do a file, save all. Let's go back and run that again. So I will come back in here, choose file, and again, it was the about. All right, check. And document checking completed. All right, no errors or warnings. So let's do the last one. Choose the file, and that will be contact. And again, no errors or warnings. That, for lack of better words, that is your test. All right, now what you're going to find, and I'm not just saying this, is the test you will take tomorrow is remarkably similar to what I just showed you. All right, so what I'm going to do, in case you need that as a helper or whatever, I'm going to do a file, and I don't think I have to save anything here. I'm going to go to exit, and I'm going to go here. So this is what I have. All right, so I still have got my Git there. What's new is this pretest, and what's new is this hots right there. So again, there's my pretest, there's pretest 1, and there it all is. So I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to right mouse click on here, and I'm going to go to git bash here. Now I don't have to go back and do a git init. Okay, I've already done that. I've already got a git or a git file there, so I can just do a git add dot. Okay, I can do a git status if I want to see what just got added. And you'll notice there's my pretest stuff. All right, and I mean, looks fine to me. Okay, so I'm going to say git commit -m. and I'm going to say pretest number 1, chapters 1 through 3 added. Again, what you put in there is not really that important. So that's in there. Now I'm going to do a git push -u origin master and hit enter. It should spin. It didn't take long because that wasn't that much to add. And I'm going to go back here to close it because I got a lot of stuff open here. So let me go back to github.com. All right. And my AWD, the one that was just called AWD, I think. Let me just grab that. Okay. There it is. Whoops. And I've got a couple of, the peoples in the class. That's not a problem. And there it is. 1 minute ago, pretest number 1. So if you are interested in looking at that, if you have any questions or anything else, that will be out here, and you will get this exact URL sent to you today. All right, but if you do want to take a look at it ahead of time or whatever, there it is. Okay. And like I said, I'm going to give you a break in a few minutes. And when I do, I'll look during the break at that margin 0 auto. There's better ways of doing it, but since we haven't learned a lot of those ways yet, we're using kind of a way, for lack of better words, we're almost forcing it. All right. Now, we just went over that pretest. Does anyone have any questions other than the margin 0 auto on anything that was on that pretest? Anything that does not make sense?
I was able to fix my issue.
Oh,
I do
good.
have a question, like a general question about
Sure.
like the Explorer. So originally I had like my about in a folder and my contact in a folder and then just my index .html, and whenever I made the CSS folder, it like was below it in the Explorer, and so like the about and contact page weren't showing any of my styles.
Right. And
Is
the reason for that is because if you had the other ones in a folder, you were giving it the wrong path to those.
Okay. So
All right.
it's does it break down from like CSS should be at the top and then your like HTML pages should be below that to make sure that it passed to them all?
Well, tell me if I'm answering your question, okay? Typically, the way that you will set this up, I don't know how, but somehow I lost bring that back up. So code, the way that this is going to be set up as we get more and more into this is what you're going to have here is you're going to have a CSS folder. You're also going to have in here an images folder. All right. And you're also going to have in here a JS folder for your JavaScript. So when you say broken down, basically it's putting it in like this because folders are shown before files. And folders and files are both shown in alphabetic order. So like I said, right now, this is empty. We don't even need this. This is empty. We don't need this. But what I'm telling you is this is the way that it'll be typically set up on the system. You'll have a CSS folder, you'll have an images folder, and you'll have a JavaScript folder. Now, with what you said, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, it sounds like you created another folder and you put about in there. You created another folder and you put contact in there. And the problem with doing that isn't doing that, but the problem is it's assuming that you are at what's called the root, so that you're right here. So if you were in another folder, you would have to put the name of that folder, okay? Or it would have to be referenced from where you currently were. It probably then would say something like ... which means go up a folder, / css/styles. All right. Now, I
Okay.
don't want to show you that right now just because the way that I'm showing you is the way that you should set it up. You shouldn't put your HTML files into any kind of folder. And that's just, when if you say, well, why? Because that's just standard protocol. That's how people do it. And I'm not saying that's a great answer. All right. But it's really about the only answer I can give you is the fact that that's how people do it.
No, that makes sense. I was just trying to, keep everything
Oh, I
organized
understand
and
that.
stuff.
I've had people in the past who come in here and they make a folder called HTML and they put everything in there. And they're like, well, why can't they do that? No, it's not that you can't do that. You can. But again, what that's going to do is it's going to mean when you path the things, the way you path to it is going to change. Now, if I was creating a site, let's say I was doing CNN's site, all right, where I've got a politics section and a sports section and whatever, there's a very good chance if I have 100 of these, I don't want to put all of them directly under there. I might very well want to put them, each into their, folder with sports HTML files and another folder with politics, etc. All right. So all I can tell you is it depends in a lot of times on the complexity of what you're doing. But for what we're doing now, and really what we'll do in this class, this will be pretty much your setup.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense.
Okay. Any other questions that anybody has? All right. Then what we're
Yeah.
good. Go
I
ahead.
was just saying, I think I'm good. I had questions on, I think it was the font and everything when I was going through this earlier, but that's all cleared
Okay.
up for me now.
Okay. And just so you know too, with the font, now, for right now, let me comment this out. I'm going to put this on its own line and I'm just going to comment it out. All right. Just for a second. There are a lot of built-in fonts in here. So if I come in here, for example, and I type in an A, notice it already grabbed. Now those are sans serif. How do I know that? Because the ending one is a sans serif. All right. So I can tell that. But if I go over to here, this Troubuchet, okay, notice, well, that's a sans serif also. All right. But I don't remember tomorrow if you're asked for a sans serif or a serif. I don't remember. But again, notice in here, and these could be either double quotes or single quotes. But we've changed now the font family that's in there. So when I do a file, save all, and I come back in here and I run this should look markedly different from the way it did before because we're using a different font. All right. We're applying that font to all pages. All right. Now, I don't know, you said that whatever your problem was, you've reconciled it, and that's good. But we will be talking about a lot of the stuff that's shown in here. We'll actually be talking about it today. All right. So if there are no other questions, we'll tell you what, we'll take 13 minutes, come back at 10:20, and I'm going to go over chapter 4 of your text at that time. So I'll see you then. Be back in a moment. All right, again, we'll start up in about 4 minutes with chapter 4. All right, it is 10:20, so I'm going to start up. I wanted to show you that during the break, what I did was I went out to the internet and found this. I just stole it. So notice what we've got here. We've got wrapper. Okay, I showed you that before. Now we're saying that the width of the section, so this is the width of that div area, should be 300 pixels. This is going to look a lot different in just a second. The margin auto said to try to center it within there. And then I drew a border around it, just a box that was 3 pixels wide. It was a solid border. You're going to learn about all this stuff later. And it was a version of blue. And then for the H1, we told it text align center. So we said to center it in there. So you'll notice it now when I look at this, how different it looks. See, it's actually in this box now. All right. And there's the about, and you can see hopefully that this is centered on the page. And here's the contact. All right. Okay, let's jump into the chapter then and start talking about how to use CSS. Okay, there will be a little bit of CSS on the test that you take tomorrow. And again, you will be asked to validate. I actually think, believe it or not, you're asked to make 5 pages. Now, you might say 5 pages, that's ridiculous. I didn't write the test. Okay, I'll just put it that way. I'm just using the tests that have been written for me. All right. So it says after you code the HTML that defines the structure, now what you want to do is add the CSS that's going to format the page. So chapters 4, 5, and 6, which are the 3 we'll cover next, Plan is to cover chapter 4 today, chapter 5 and chapter 6 tomorrow. All right. And then we'll see where we are at that time. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. Say that again. Tomorrow's your test. We'll cover chapters 5 and 6 on Thursday. My error. Tomorrow is the test. Okay. So what do we have in here? We get an introduction to CSS. Then we talk about measurements and colors. Those are two different things. And when we talk about measurements, there's two different kinds of measurements, and they are relative measurements and absolute. We'll talk about those. Then we'll talk about different ways of working with text. And we'll talk about, as it says there, different selectors that you can put in. And then normally what happens in here, is towards the end of the chapters, not at the very end, but towards the end, they'll actually give you an example. And in that example, they'll try to use and utilize most everything that they've done in here so far. So you can see that in there. And there's a lot of stuff we haven't really even talked about. For instance, this San Joaquin Valley Town Hall, there's a shadow around all that stuff. We're going to talk about that in a moment. You can see the bolding. You can see they use different colors for different things, etc. Here, this is right justified. We're going to talk about all of that stuff. All right. Now, as we go back, and let me jump back, I don't even remember what page that is, but we'll find it. Okay, so it's further than that. We're going to be talking about, like I said, several things that we have not talked about at all yet. All right. And don't let that throw you. Again, as always, if you have questions as we're going over these, if something does not make sense, I'm going to take for granted that you're going to ask. All right. All right. There we go. Okay. Finally, at the end, there's this how to use the developer tools. There's that is not really something you can be tested on, but I want to show you something that may help you with that. Now, hopefully you all saw that this morning I emailed you two things. All right. One of the things that I emailed you was the pretest or practice test. The other one was this, and it had a listing of URLs in it. Now, this is, for lack of better words, this URL right here that I'm highlighting right at the top, or I'm trying to highlight, that's kind of the magical one for 90% of everything that's shown below. All right, it's in W3 Schools, and it's the CSS reference page that's in W3 Schools. What do I mean? Well, I want to show you exactly what I mean. All right, so I'm going to bring that page up and hit enter. And notice virtually anything you could look for with CSS is in here in an alphabetized list. For instance, I mentioned before, let me move this way down, that we talked a little bit about creating a shadow. All right, when you look here, you say, let's see, oh, there's no shadow. No, but should be a text shadow in here. So if I click there, that's one of the things that'll be discussed in here. They explain to you what that means. And they even, they'll even show you what that means. All right, so you can see that. Now, this is red. So notice if I change it from this, if I change it to 00FF00, which is green, you can see how it changes. And if I change it again to blue and run it, so this is a great way to learn this stuff, is to go right out to W3 Schools. All right, go out to these reference pages and take a look at the stuff that's in there. All right, okay. So I'm not a big guy on sitting there and following history, etc., with all this stuff. So anything that's in here that's historical in nature, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Let's just say, suffice to say, that the current version of CSS, which is again an acronym for Cascading Style Sheets, the current version is 3.0, and that current version now is going into its 24th year. So it's been around for quite a while. So there haven't been major revisions to it in several years. All right. So as far as providing styles for a page, This should be nothing new to you. You just saw that in the test. In other words, you saw me come in and create an external style sheet, all right, and then go to it. Now, the question got asked before about, coming in there and being able to link to something correctly. Where you see that dot dot, all right, what that means is I want to go up one folder level from where I currently am. Why did they show it like that? I don't know. All right. But dot means where you currently are, and dot dot means go up a level. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry about it, because it'll be quite a while before we even care about that. They call their folder styles. Usually the folder is called CSS. I don't know why they called it styles, but they did. In fact, I always just call my folder CSS, and if I'm working with one style sheet, I call it styles.css. You can have more than one style sheet. Why would you maybe want to have more than one style sheet? Well, one of the things that we'll talk about later on in the book is you quite often have a totally different style sheet if you want to have a style sheet set up for being able to print out a site. All right. For instance, if I'm going to print out a site, I might not want to allow the user to print out any images, just because that, they would, if they're in color, and, that would use up a lot of their ink, etc. If I'm printing out a website, it wouldn't really make sense to sit there and show all the hyperlinks like that, or the navigation bar at the top. So you can have multiple ones. Another reason I might want to have more than one CSS file is maybe I want one that'll handle most every single medium, but if I run it on a phone, I might want to have one that's totally different. So there's a lot of reasons that you can have two or more, is what I'm saying. All right, you saw this. So having this means it's an external style sheet. All right. Having this, where you've got the style in here, again, the author calls this embedded. I call it internal because that's the way I learned it. It's no big thing one way or the other. But you can put as many things as you want in there within these two style tags. All right. Now, what's important is anything that you put in here is meant to, basically, if I've got 5 pages on my website and if I put a link like this in for all 5 pages, that'll run on all 5 pages. On the other hand, something like this will only run on the individual page in which I put it. All right. So again, with an external, it's designed to be site-wide, and internal or embedded is designed to be page-wide. And the other one that they show here with applying the style attribute was the one I showed you earlier. All right, that is element-wide. And you'll notice both with the embedded and with the element wide, they're both not recommended. And as I mentioned to you before, the reason they're not recommended is what you want to ideally have in your different files is what's called a separation of concerns. All right. What I'm doing in here is I'm adding CSS right inside of an HTML file. That's considered poor practice. All right. So ideally, you use external for everything that you're doing. Okay. Now, it says there the sequence from which they're applied. This gets to be a little confusing. All right. Because it doesn't go from a major to minor sequence, it goes from a minor to major sequence. What that means is if on the same page I have an external style sheet like this, and I have an embedded style sheet like this, and I have an inline style like this, the inline style takes precedence. So for instance, this H1 says 250%. This one says 500%. So this one, since it's the most minor, takes precedence over this one. And, when I've explained this before to people, sometimes, well, that doesn't make sense. No, it makes total sense. Because if your external took precedence over everything else, then you could never use the embedded or the site, the style wide, the style tag. You'd never be able to use them because this would override it all the time. All right. Now you can go in, like I said, you can go in and read the stuff yourselves. I don't want to read it to you. Also, it gets a little confusing, and you're going to see this in just a page or two, that by default, I like simple definitions. So my definition of by default is unless told otherwise. So by default, every page that you write has some CSS that gets applied to it automatically. And you might say, well, no, it doesn't. Yes, it does. The browser actually goes and applies some to it. If you want to remove that, then you add either some kind of a reset, and we're going to look at that very shortly, if not on the next page. All right, here's your basic selectors. Now, most of the stuff that we've done so far has been like this. We've done main or H2, etc. I showed you with that wrapper how you can do it with an ID, and with a class you start it with a dot. All right. So is it a big deal? Well, I just want to mention that to you. If somebody is trying to get in to the class, if somebody would please just permit them, allow them to get in, I'd appreciate it. This universal selector means apply it to everything. If you use that asterisk, all right, again, protocol says you put it at the very beginning of your style sheet. I want to say that again, that if you're going to use this universal selector right there, you put it at the beginning of the style sheet. In fact, what you're going to notice as we start changing around our pages, etc., is that typically the way that people set their pages up is you go from top to bottom on the page, and that's how you set up your style sheet as well. So typically your footer will be at the bottom, for example. All right. And your nav, etc., will be at the top. All right. So if you follow something like this here, you're going to end up with something that looks more like this here. Okay. And there's more to it than that. All right. But for now, I'm giving you what you need. Okay. So again, that's the universal selector. Here we're doing it by type, H1, pair P, etc. What this means is all paragraphs, all H1 tags, everything inside of a main tag. This means only things where we set ID equal copyright. This means only things where we go in and we say class equal blue or class equal right. And let me tell you as well, very quickly, this example they show here with blue, don't do that. Just if you want to make text blue like that, don't call the class blue. And the reason for that is because I've seen people do this, and you can see this out on professional sites. They change later, and oh, we don't want blue. They make it green. All right, so they change that to green, then they don't change this one. So now you've got a class that's called blue that's making things green, and all that does is it adds confusion. All right. All right. So this is that normalized thing that we talked about before. I'm going to show you two of them, one of which is not in your book. If you go out to this website that's right here, http://nicholas.github.io/normalize.css, you get this. You're like, well, what the heck is that? Well, if I click here where it says download, that's what this is. And basically, in a nutshell, what this thing right here is doing is it's trying its best to turn off all defaults that a browser has, to turn off all default settings that a browser goes and puts on a page. All right. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this one. It works great. Okay, but I want to show you another one because this is the one that I usually use. There is a guy, basically when CSS was in its early years, and this guy is still active in it, there's a guy named Eric Myers who did a lot of work with CSS. So rather than using that normalize, I typically use an Eric Myers CSS reset. All right. I like the way it looks better. I like the way it acts better. It's right there. Now, this is most every HTML tag that you'd probably want to use on a site, most everyone, okay? And what does this say? This says remove any margin it has, remove any padding it has, remove any border that it has, set its font size to the natural 100%. All right, the inherit I'm going into right now with you. And the vertical align baseline means just basically center it, for lack of better words. But I like that because to me, and this is the rest of it, it's much slimmer than the other one that we saw. And I just like the way this one works. You can use either one. So if you are asked to use some kind of a reset, you can use the normalized one. You can use this one. It's totally up to you. And again, the guy's name is Eric Myers, and I'll try to remember. Oops. Yeah. To put that because I've got a couple URLs that are in addition to what I looked at before, but it's right. Come on, right here. There. Okay. All right. Now they talk about what it does here. All right. As it says, it makes minor adjustments to the browser defaults. And why would you want to do that? Because the browser defaults for Edge might be different than the browser defaults for Chrome, that might be different than the browser defaults for Firefox, etc. So you're starting on a level playing field, which is one of the reasons that people do that. If you use it, if you use normalize, or if you use that Eric Meyer that I just showed you, it must be placed in the file. It must be placed before your own style sheet. So in other words, this one that I just showed you here, let's see, where is that? This one. If I was going to use this one, let's just say, it doesn't matter, I can grab either one of these. But if I was going to use this one, and I was going to put it in the site that we had been working on before the break, I don't want to put it in here after this. No, I want to put it in there. That's my style sheet. So I want to make sure that I put it in there like that. And again, I'd have to put it in as link rel equals style sheet href equals, and put it on the end there, and then in my tag. Okay, and let me view word wrap so you can see all of it. Okay, so what I'm saying is any built-in CSS normalize or reset must go before yours. It must, if you want it to work correctly. All right. So they talk about some drawbacks. Yeah, well, I mean, the one that's not even in here, when they talk about the overhead, it's going to take a little bit longer to put in your browser, but to actually load the page. So we're talking literally seconds. All right. And again, it says to illustrate this, the application for this chapter uses it, but it's the last time the normalized style sheet is used for this book. So they're explaining it, but they just don't want to get boiled down with it as far as the importance. So they're not going to be using it much in here. All right, measurements and colors. I'm going to jump over to the next page, or try to. Why it's not letting me do this today, so let's see. My connection's here, so let me bring this back. There it is. All right. If you look at what you see on this table here, the first two symbols that they mentioned, those being pixels for PX and points for PT, those are called absolute measurements. The other three, M's and rems and percentages, are relative measurements. Why is that important? You will probably almost never use absolute measurements. All right. Now, that's a general statement, and you're going to see times in here where I'm going to break that rule. But what I'm telling you is it's always recommended that you use relative, because typically relative measurements will try to scale as the size on your screen of the screen that you're looking at to view the web page changes. It'll try to scale as best it can. All right. And you can make it scale, and this is what we're going to be getting into now. All right. So again, they show an example in here, and they've got all this, and it ends up giving you something that looks like this. All right. But again, as it says, the units of measure, you can use them on a lot of different things. All right. And I told you how I'm going to be breaking those rules that I just gave you. Well, look, there's pixels. That's an absolute measurement. All right. So that says we always want to keep it that size. If I want to go in and convert pixels like this, which is an absolute measurement, if I want to convert it to ems or rems, and I use rems most of the time, you're going to get into those in just a minute, you take that number there and you divide it by 16. All right, I don't know what that is. That's like about 18 or 19. So if I change that, let's just say it's 18.25. And you can use percentages here. So 18.25 rem or m. That's going to be almost the same thing. All right. And sometimes that gets people upset. I thought we wouldn't have to do math in here. Hey, it's not hard to do. Bring up the calculator and divide it by 16. So again, absolute measurements are pixels and points. Relative measurements are ems and rems and percentages. You're going to see, as we go through this, you're going to see examples of all of them. All right. Now, so far, almost everything that we've done with colors, I put in the actual color itself. All right. And if we look in here, boy, that's really taking a long time. It says the web page for CSS colors. All right. Color keywords. All right. So these are the things that basically you have available to you by default. What does that mean? That means you can literally use these words if you want to. So I can use medium sea green to get that color, or I can use this right here. So what's the difference between those? All right. Doing it the first way is going to give you the color name. Doing it this way is going to give you a hexadecimal version. Hexadecimal means that rather than using base 10 like we use, where we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you're using base 16. So you count as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then you've got A, B, C, D, E, F. So F is what we would call 15. And what we would call 10 or a 1, 0 is actually 16. You don't need to worry about that. All right. But the recommendation is that you don't use the color names, that you use the hex values. So you say, well, you just told us we didn't have to worry about them. You can look up virtually any color that exists, all right, and find out. Now, let's look at this as far as this goes. All right, let's see, let me bring this up here. There we go. All right. So what I'm about to show you here is what's referred to as red, green, blue, RGB. So if I say pound, FF, and it doesn't matter if I use capital letters or lowercase, 0000, that means I want the full allotment of red, no green, and no blue. That's going to be red. All right. If I do this, pound 00FF00, that's blue. That means no red, the full allotment of blue. I'm sorry, that'll be green. So this is RGB. So the first two numbers that are in there are for red. The second two numbers that are in there are for green. So let's put a hyphen there, and we'll put in red, green, and blue. All right. Now, what else? Well, this oops, try that again. That is black. And this is white. All right. So this is total saturation of red, total absence of green and blue. This is total absence of red, total saturation of green, total absence of blue. This is total absence of both red and green and total saturation of blue. This is a total absence of red and green and blue. This is a total saturation of red and green and blue. All right. And, everything else that we look at is basically a version of that. So in other words, hopefully what I'm about to show you makes a little sense. If I come in here and do something like this, pound EE0000, what is that? That's going to be some version of red. It's not going to be the bright, brilliant red because it's not a total saturation of red. It's mostly saturated, but it's not a total saturation. All right. And again, there's more in your book, but I'd rather show it to you kind of like this. And how do you learn this? You just sit and play with this. Make yourself an H1 tag on a page and then just set the color for H1 and start playing with this. Now, as you'd probably guess, if I try to put this right here on a white background, you're not going to see it. All right. So if my background's white and I try to put something in there that's white, it just won't show. All right. Now there's another thing that you can put in here too. We're going to look at it in just a minute. All right. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do color, bottom line. And although I didn't show it to you, so if I go back to this reference that we looked at before, all right, and I go down here, I'm not going to click each one of these, and we just wouldn't have the time to do it. But if I go over here to color, there's the color property. All right. And you'll notice as we go through here, there'll be examples. They'll show you ways that you can set it because there's different ways. There is setting it with a hex value. There is setting it with an RGB value. And you might look at that and go, well, what's the difference? These are the ones that I showed you. And the first two again are red. The second two are green. And the last two are blue. All right. Here, the number that's here and the number that's here and the number that's here is the amount of red, the amount of green, and the amount of blue, but it's not using hex. All right. It is using decimal numbers. So the maximum, the number that's here must be between 0 and 255. 0 is total absence. 255 is total saturation. That's to be the amount of green, and that'll be the amount of blue. All right. And again, if that makes absolutely no sense to you, just make yourself up a little page and start playing with the colors that are on it. All right. Then let's add some more into this. You can also have an RGB A. And A stands for alpha. This is a number that you put in that's between 0 and 1. All right, so why would you want something in there that is like that between a 0 and 1? Well, maybe you've seen things on a page where something has got like a background that might look kind of faded. All right, so you typically do this for effect. You don't ever have to do it, but you see it a lot on different web pages. So again, the A in there is for alpha. Okay, and there's also another way you can do it, which is HSL, which stands for hue, saturation, and light. All right, they're all explained in your book. And you notice when you use HSL, there's even an HSLA for alpha you can use with that as well. All right, so I'm kind of giving you the highlights. But in here, they show you first the 16 basic color names. There's probably, last I heard, there were close to between 200 and 300 built-in colors. You saw them in that listing that I showed you in here just a bit ago. All right, so there's different ways that you can set this up. Again, notice it's white because that's total saturation. That's black because it's total absence. That's red with a total saturation of red, a total absence of green and blue. All right. One thing they mention in here, and you may or may not be aware of it, approximately 10% of the world is colorblind. All right. I've got a brother who was denied entry into the United States Navy several times before he finally got in. And one of the reasons was he's colorblind. All right. So what they're saying there with the colorblind is you want to make sure that your background and your, the background that you're using and the foreground or the text color aren't so close that it's very hard for people who are visually impaired to recognize, to see what's on there. As it says, dark text on a light background is typically easier to read. All right. And black type on a white background is the easiest. It's also the most bland or blah looking. All right. I do want to mention one thing. You may not care about this at all, but I at least want you to see this. Again, you probably won't find it in a book. But if I say this, let's just grab these two right here, just that FF. All right. So if I grab FF, that is, again, it's base 16. All right. So what I mean is this is going to be equal to the equivalent of 255. All right. And you can do all the counting and stuff you want, but this is the amount of ones that you're going to have. And this is the amount of 16s that you're going to have. Well, how do I know that that's equal to 255? All right. This means that I'm going to have 15 ones, so to speak. And this means I'm going to have 15 16s. Well, who cares? Well, add those together. 15 times 1 is 15. 15 times 16 is 240. 240 plus 15 is 255. And it all has to do with the way that computers are configured internally, but there are certain numbers, certain things in there that are magical, for lack of better words. All right? Probably a little more than you care to hear, but at least you have heard it. All right. Now, what you hopefully have noticed too is if I come in here, notice that when I put this in, okay, that it actually shows me the color. That's built into the browser. So if I come in here for H1s and I say color and I say green, for example, it's going to show me what it's going to give me. On the other hand, if I choose green yellow, you can see that it's going to show me again what it's going to give me. And if I change that to just yellow, etc., you get the idea. All right. And again, if you want more on any of these, that list of URLs that I showed you when we started today, all right, that list of URLs, I said the first one that was in there was the thing that had the CSS reference. So anything you want, if you think, well, you went over this too fast, or you went over that too fast, it's all in here. Well, I'm not happy at all with the way that this is working. The school went to Red Shelf, which is what I'm using, a couple years ago. Before that, we had a different product that I liked a lot better because we didn't get a lot of this. I'm not sure why I'm getting that either. Boy, oh boy. And my internet connection looked like it was up and it's strong, so that it has nothing to do with the connection. Well, I don't know what's wrong with this. I wish I did. So let me try to just shut both these down and bring it back up again. I don't want to reboot because that can end up knocking all of you off while I'm trying to tape, and I don't want to do that. I've asked the company for a PDF of the book in case something like this were to happen, and I was told, well, you already have it on Red Shelf. That didn't answer my question. And I mean, this is a waste of my time and this is a waste of your time, and I don't want to do that. While I'm waiting for this, let's go back to here and talk about a few things that are discussed in the chapter. Okay. All right. Okay. Aligning content. This is kind of an important one. All right. As it says, well, actually, this is, so I didn't want to do it this way. It's something we're going to hit on later. When we get to the end of the book, we'll talk about animation. There is a certain amount of animation that you can do with this stuff. So you can make stuff, look at that. You can make stuff kind of move across the screen, etc. So we'll talk about some of that. The background I've already mentioned, you can either say background or background color. They both will do the same thing. I usually say background color, and the reason I usually say that is sometimes if I don't put the word color in there, it confuses people. All right. We're going to get into fairly quickly a background attachment. And when you've got a background attachment, all right, you can see there's the attachment. It's the tree that's right there with the owl in it. We'll be doing stuff along those lines. We'll work with background images, pretty much the same stuff. With a lot of this right here where it says background, it's just how you want to set your background up. If you've got background position X and you've got a picture, it'll go all the way up and down your X axis. If you say background position Y, it'll go all the way around your Y axis. If you say background repeat and it's a real little image, it'll put itself on the screen as many times as it can. So this is all stuff that we're going to be talking about. All right. The border, if you want to draw borders around things, just basically draw the equivalent of a square around things. Here we go. Looks like it's back. All right. So they talk in here. It says CSS provides more ways to provide colors. And what they're going to talk about in here. Just unbelievable. Well, I'm going to make sure that when I finish today, I'm going to contact the publisher and I'm going to ask if they have a regular PDF and tell them about this problem because I don't want this to happen again in here. All right, there we go. So there's the red, green, blue. All right. This number that I said here for this alpha, it's known as opacity. All right. The smaller, it's a value between 0 and 1. The smaller the number, the more transparent something looks. The closer to 1, the more opaque it looks. So if you want something to barely show on a page, you could set its opacity like to 0.2 or something like that. By default, the opacity is set to 1. All right. If you want more with hue, saturation, and lightness, HSL, which I never use. All right. But there's an example. Notice it's 0.2, so you can see how washed out it looks. All right. There's all sorts of different ways that you can set this stuff up. When you take a test and you're asked to do some of that, if there's 4 or 5 ways of doing it, just pick the one that makes the most sense to you. All right. So it's 113. Let me see if I can do it this way. All right, working with text, we've started talking about this already. I showed you the font family stuff earlier. As you'd probably guess, there's more that you can do with text than just just using font family. And again, I showed you this a little bit earlier. We're going to go over it in a later chapter, but Google has their own set of fonts that, as we looked at before, had almost 1,500 fonts. One of the reasons I believe, at least, that Google did this is for a long time, the only fonts that you had were the ones that came with your browser. And after a while, people's websites kind of all looked alike. But now with things like Google Fonts, and there's other ones other than Google Fonts, you've got thousands of different fonts that you can use that can really make your site look a whole heck of a lot different. All right, they show some generic font families right there. We already mentioned the serif, and as I mentioned, it looks like it's got the little taper, or little flares on there. All right, when I said, for example, like with the letter A, you can kind of see it on here. No, it's not on that one because that's a sans serif. Yeah, you can see it here. That's a serif font. You can see the little tail on that NR, the R there and there, for example. And you specify families like this. I showed you that before, but I just want to say that what that means is, hey, use Arial font if it's available on the machine. If it's not, use Helvetica. If that's not available, use whatever sans serif comes with the system. And whenever you set up a font family like this, all right, you should always put serif or sans serif at the end as a fallback. All right. Font size is how big you want it to be. All right. Notice they're using an absolute measurement there. That's 12 points. 12 divided by 16 is 0.75. So that's the same thing as saying like 0.75 rem. But again, when you use rems and ems and percentages, they will try to adjust based on the type of medium you're using to look at your page. All right. All right, that's most of the stuff I think in here. Oh, and last thing, remember I said this before, that if you're using a font family, if like this, if there's blank spaces in there, you have to put it either within double quotes or single quotes. All right, it doesn't matter which you use. This isn't good because too, I'm lecturing this afternoon in my class and I'm using a different book, but I'm using Red Shelf in there as well. And man, this does not make me a happy camper. All right, let's jump. There we go. All right, styling and formatting fonts. It gets a little bit confusing when you start looking at this. That's why I've been going and using the page that's on the right-hand side of your book that has examples, because I think that makes it a little bit easier, typically at least, for people to understand, is to actually see it in action, so to speak. All right. Font style, you'll notice in there, as it says, it's how the font is slanted. By default, the font style is set to normal. So if you want it set to normal, you don't have to do anything. Italic and oblique are basically the same thing. I don't know why there is an oblique. All right. But, if you want to set font style, if you want italic, you can just say font style italic. And you might say, well, you told us before to use an M. Yeah. But what we're doing is we're transitioning over. We don't want to put an M tag into our HTML. It's that idea that I mentioned to you before about a separation of concerns. We don't want to do that. All right. We want to put it into our CSS. The font weight is the boldness. All right. And you can use bold, bolder, etc. Or you can use numbers that go from 1 to 9,000 or to 900 rather. I will tell you that 99 times out of 100, when I want to set something to bold, I'll just say font weight bold. It's the easiest way to do it. Font variant, whether small caps should be used, normal and small caps. Line height will become more important later as we end up creating pages, as far as being able to set stuff up on a page. As it says, it's the amount of vertical space for each line. In fact, let's show you that one. All right, so let's come in here and we'll do, I'll put a paragraph in here for a paragraph tag, and we'll say line height, and I'm going to say 1.6. Okay. And let me do a file save. You may or may not remember the way this looked before, but our, what was it? Our about page? Nope. Our home page had 2 paragraphs in it, right? There they are. And if I open them up with line server, that's the line height right here. It's the amount of space between each one. You might say, oh, that's the way it looked before. No, it isn't. Because if I go back and I change that back again from 1.6 to, let's say, just 1.0, and I do a file save and I go back and I look at this again, you'll notice it's much more cramped than it was before. All right. The text, the stuff that's in here, I will tell you probably the one of these that's in here that you'll probably never use is text indent. I don't know. Well, I mean, I'm dating myself, but back when I was a kid, when the teacher wanted us to indent paragraphs and we were learning to write, you had to move it over 10 spaces or whatever, but it's not that big a thing today. Text align is just that. You can have things that are left justified, center justified, right justified, or fully justified. They are the equivalent of, if you've ever gone through and looked in Microsoft Word, for example, you've got a bunch of options in there for that. The vertical alignment that's going to become important when we bring in images. It's basically how you typically line your text up with your images. And text decoration is kind of a neat one, because if you remember when we looked at this earlier, we get these dots here, right there, and we got the dots down here too. All right. But if I come through here and I come in and I say, let's see, for every LI that I have, I think it's the LI, but we'll find out. And you say text decoration none, that's basically telling it that you don't want those dots that are there to show. Oops. Try that again. All right. Well, it's not the LI. I think it's something in there. We're going to be looking at it. Don't worry about it. All right. All right. Again, we're going to go over tomorrow. You're taking the test. Thursday, we're going to go over 5 and 6. Friday will be a lab. Next Monday, we'll take another one of these practice tests. And everything that'll be on the test, I'll show you examples of it. All right. Okay. I am going to make sure that right after class today, I contact the publisher and ask for PDFs of both books so we don't have to do this again. All right, next was shadows. All right, and with shadows, you may or may not remember that we looked a little bit at that before. It's a little quirky the way that it's set up, but there's a few different things that you have to set up, and they're explained in here if the book will ever show me. All right, and that is basically the color you want to use and the amount of shadow, for lack of better words, that you want to use. You usually keep this down to just a few pixels. All right. And if you look in here, notice they've got text shadow, and here it says 4 pixels, 4 pixels. All right. As it says, that's the amount of horizontal and vertical. If you don't give it a color, it makes a shadow that's the same color as the actual text. Here they've given it a color. All right. And you can see that the color in here is red, so you can see the background. They mention in here too, as it says, remember the visually impaired, too much shadow or blur makes it much harder to read. All right. There are a lot of sites that are out there that are just really done terribly. All right. And a lot of times because people who create the sites, they sit down there with a book and they just start following the stuff that's in there, which may or may not be good. All right. In fact, I was going to show you this, not today, but I can show it to you right now anyway. There's actually a guy who makes a living. He writes books, and these books are called, what is it? Web pages that suck. And he actually, I don't know if it's still out there or not, but he's had a site out there. There it is. And he goes through the worst websites. Now, it looks like it may not be that active anymore because it's 2016, etc. But here's the worst websites in 2005. You go, and these are at least were actual sites. All right. Sometimes the best way to learn how to do something is to look at how other people did it and then not do it that way. All righty. Okay. The next thing that's in here, this is probably the hardest thing in the chapter, just so you know. So if you're the kind of person who just concentrates on a few things, I would concentrate on this float stuff. Now, the good news is, the bad news is you have to learn it. The good news is hardly anybody uses this anymore. When we get to chapters 9 and 10 in the book, you're going to see a new way of doing this, but there are still millions of sites that are out there that use floating. All right. And basically when you float, you're trying to push something to the left or you're trying to push it to the right. And in fact, quite often when you use floating, the reason you do is you want text to float around an image. More often than not, that's what you're going to want to have. All right. So, right here, this text isn't exactly floating around the image, but if you set this thing up, if that's an image is known as, it's an inline element, it may not look nice like this where the text comes up and just basically lines up right there. But what they've done here is they have floated the image to the left. So that says push this over as far as you can and then try to put stuff next to it. You can float to the left and you can float to the right. And when you don't want to float anymore, you can set the float to none, which turns off floating. All right. So as it says here, to float an image, you use the float property. All right. In chapters 5 and 6, it says you'll learn how to set margins and float elements, but this is meant to give you a beginning idea of what's going on. All right. And again, as always, the best way to learn this stuff is to sit there and make a page and just play with it a little bit. All right. If you do that, there's going to be things that are going to work and there are going to be things that are not going to work. All right. And that's great. Again, a great way to learn. Okay. When you start creating more complex CSS, I'm going to keep going. I'll go till about 11:30. But When you've got more complex CSS, you start working typically with what are called combinators. And the only thing I can tell you is when you start working with CSS, you probably don't even want to use these, because what it does is it brings in another level or layer of complexity into what you're trying to do with this stuff. There's different symbols that you use that have different meanings, and they show you some examples here. All right. So this is a descendant. So for example, this says, I only want you to work on LIs that are inside of a main. I only want you to work on anchor tags that are inside of an unordered list, etc. So when you combine these things together, they're typically known as combinators. I'll let you read that. I will tell you that unless I could be wrong on this, but like for your next test, I don't think you have to use any of these. But there's something that you should get used to looking at, because if you get a job as a web designer and you go to work for a company, or maybe you get hired in as a contractor and you work for a company, there's at least a chance that people have used these. So you've got to at least understand somewhat what they mean. All right. So on the bottom, as it says, when you're coding CSS, you usually don't need these attribute selectors. They're more useful when you're using JavaScript. So there's something we'll go back and we'll take a look at later on in the semester. Look at that. No internet connection. Oh. Even though it says it's up and running. All right. Pseudo class and pseudo element selector. Pseudo means false, just so you know that. All right. Pseudo means false. Well, what does that mean? Well, what this means is, and you probably have seen this already, that if I go out and put a link on a web page, by default, it's going to be blue. All right. If somebody clicks on it, it'll turn purple. All right. But you can change that color scheme if you don't like it. For instance, you could say that I wanted all links that were not yet clicked on to be orange, and you could do that. And there may be a reason you want to do that, but there's other things that are in here as well. I'm not going to read these, but you can take a look at common CSS pseudo classes. All right. And the ones, the link, the visit, etc., those are the ones I mentioned. Active, as it says, is if you put your mouse, basically, if by default, if you put your mouse over a link and you click, but you didn't let go yet. Hover means you take your mouse and you put it over something and it's just resting there. You pull it back out again and it's not hovering anymore. All right. Focus, as it says, that'll make more sense in chapter 11 or so when we talk about forms. First child, last child, and only child. Yeah, again, those are fairly complex things. We're going to be working with them. All right. This first letter or first line, if I wanted to take the first letter of a paragraph and make it bigger, or the entire maybe first sentence of a paragraph and make it bigger, I could use these. And they give you some examples in here. All right. One thing about this, notice that accessibility guideline. It says apply the same formatting to the hover and the focus. It says that way people who can't use a mouse, it'll look the same as people who do have a mouse. All right. And you want to shoot for consistency as much as you can. Again, these pseudo classes, as it says, they're predefined. All right. Whereas these elements that are in there allow you to work with stuff that has been predefined. All right. We're coming towards the end of the chapter, and here they talk about how the cascade rules work. I do want to mention to you real quickly, again, I want to go back to what I'd shown you earlier, and that was this list of the different URLs that I sent you. This box sizing I didn't talk about. We don't have to worry about it now. We actually should hit on it tomorrow. The normalized we went over, the Eric Meyer we went over, the units of measurements we've gone over, the colors we've gone over, the font families we've gone over, different font things, the text, there's floating, there's combinators. Well, as far as how stuff cascades, I like the definition that was given here, which is in the Mozilla website, the developer.mozilla.org. And basically, it's a lot of what I told you before, that by default, it'll do, the system will put in any default CSS in there. Then if you've got external CSS, it'll do that. Then if you've got embedded CSS for a page, then it'll do that. Then if you've got any inline CSS, it'll do that. That's the cascade type of property that they talk about. All right. All right. One of the other things that's discussed, and while I'm waiting for this to come back, because I know it's there, is we have to be able to figure out how to use, bring the URL up for you. The Chrome developer tools. The way that you get to the Chrome developer tools, I want to show you this, and this shouldn't matter at all. I can bring up any web page I want. So let me come in here to, for example, to CNN.com. All right. Now, if I right mouse click on here and I choose inspect, that brings up the developer tools. All right. And if I take my mouse and I put it over something, it's going to show me this is all the CSS that's on this page. All right. You'll notice that some of the stuff that's in here will have lines through it. And what that means is it was originally set to one thing and it's been overwritten to something else. So originally the transition was set up like this. Now it's set up like this type of an idea. And you can go in there and you can do stuff in here, but this is a great way to sit and learn how to use CSS. You can do it with your own pages as well. So in other words, the stuff I showed you before. All right, so here's my, let me go to the index page here. Let me bring that up. All right, so if I wanted to find out more about this, I can either right mouse click and choose inspect, or I can hit on my function keys that are at the top of my keyboard. I can hit the F12 key. They both work the same way. So if I hit F12, the same thing, well, it's supposed to happen. I'll hit inspect here. Now notice if I take my mouse and put it over and start to click, all right, it looks like it's still loading, but it's got a bunch of different stuff in here. It shows me what my line height is for my paragraphs. If you remember, I set that to 1.6 and I reset it to 1.0. It shows things in here as far as how the paragraphs are set up. And you might say, you didn't put a margin block start and a margin block end, etc. in there. No, the browser did. All right. So it's a way that you can come in and learn about things that are in here. All right. And you can highlight different stuff in here. We're going to do this more as we go on. This right here is what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Right there. That's known as the CSS box model. All right. You don't have to worry about it a bit for right now, but just realize that we will talk about it tomorrow. Now, when we go through here and we start talking about that, one of the things that I gave you on here was this. If you go out to this URL here, you don't ever have to do this if you don't want to. There is a free hour-long course on how to use the Chrome developer tools. It's by an online company that has courses for free and that are paid. That's called Udemy.com. I've literally gotten hundreds of classes from them over the years. They will ask you to sign up. There's no credit card. There's nothing involved. All right. But if you're interested in that, just to show it to you, grab that. Kind of a long URL. Then if I bring that up here, this is going to be the class. That's the gentleman that teaches it. And as you can see, there's 3 sessions. First one's 22 minutes. The second one's 19. The third one is 5. So again, it's about 45 minutes to an hour long. And all right, so he'll walk through how to use it in much more depth and breadth of coverage than I'm doing right now. All right. All right, let's see if I can get this thing to move. I know there's only one more thing that's discussed in here, and if I have to. All right. So they talk about page layout here. This is what I'd shown you earlier. They give you an example. They build a web page in here, and you'll be working on that. All right. If you follow along, you can create it yourselves if you want to do that. So. Well, the next section that I can't get to right now is on the Chrome developer tools. All right. And then there's one more thing that's discussed in here, and that's probably around here someplace. And that's talking about CSS variables. Over time, CSS has gotten more complex. And what I mean is it's become in its own way almost more of a programming language. And the reason I'm telling you that is you can go in CSS in cascading style sheets and you can set up variables. What are variables? Why would you want to set them up, etc.? There's the Chrome developer tools that I showed you before. See if I can try to bring this. The reason that you might want to use variables is you can set it and use something in multiple places. All right. And if that makes no sense to you, it really probably shouldn't right now. But in this list I gave you, all right, in that list I gave you, the last thing that's in there is another nice website that's called csstricks.com. And it's a complete guide to custom properties. All right. Right now, I want to concentrate on the fundamentals and having you learn those. I'm not concerned right now if you say, well, you kind of went over those variables quickly. I don't know what they are. You can go to this example if you want and take a look at it. All right. And it's going to be pretty long, but it's going to be filled with example after example on how to use this stuff. All right. So let's see. So that was the last thing that's in here are these custom properties. As it says, also referred to as CSS variables. Again, they're properties that can be used throughout an entire document. And they will show you in there how to use them. I believe at least there's nothing at all on your test, your next test, that's going to go into this stuff. They're pretty complex topics. And that's it. All right. So tomorrow, you're going to have the test. I will make sure that test is sent out to you by 7 a.m. Those of you who plan on taking the class the test during class time, try to look at it ahead of time. So if you have any questions, you'll be able to ask. I will be online the entire time. If somebody were to ask a question and I'm like, wow, that's a great question, everybody should hear it, I might break in, but I don't plan on doing that. All right. So unless anybody has any last questions here on chapter 4, all right, I will see you all then tomorrow for your first hands-on test. Questions, anybody? All right, this is what we're going to cover, the box model tomorrow. All right, then if there are no questions, have a good day. I will see you tomorrow morning.
You as well, sir.
Thanks.